Welcome to another journey into the unexplained. Tonight, we explore some of the most unsettling and seemingly credible encounters with creatures that exist somewhere between folklore and reality. These are accounts from ordinary people who saw things they couldn't explain, encounters that left them shaken and questioning everything they thought they knew about the world. So settle in, relax, and let these stories carry you through the night. The summer of 1924 was supposed to be a season of promise for a small group of gold prospectors working the rugged slopes of Mount St. Helens in the state of Washington. The mountain, decades before its famous eruption, was a remote and primal place, its southeastern shoulder cut through by deep gorges and blanketed in old-growth forest. Douglas firs stretched towards the sky, while thick hemlock and cedar created shadows so deep that even midday felt like dusk beneath their canopy. It was in this untamed wilderness that 5 men had staked a claim they called the Vander White, and for 6 years they had been working the land, searching for gold along creek beds and springs. The miners were Fred Beck, Marion Smith, Roy Smith, Gabe Lefevre, and John Peterson, and they had built themselves a sturdy log cabin near a steep gorge where they could shelter from the elements and store their equipment. Throughout their years working this remote claim, the men had occasionally come across something odd in the wilderness. Large footprints appearing near water sources, tracks that were too big to belong to any bear and too human-like to be dismissed as anything ordinary. They had never seen what made the prints, and for the most part, they tried not to dwell on it. The forest held many mysteries, and men who spent their lives in such places learned to accept the unexplained as part of the landscape. But in July of 1924, those mysteries would come crashing into their lives in a way none of them could have anticipated. It happened in the afternoon. Fred Beck and Marion Smith had gone down to the creek to fetch water when they spotted something at the canyon rim, roughly 80 yards distant. Standing near a large pine tree was a figure, upright and covered in dark hair. It was massive, perhaps 7 feet tall, with proportions that seemed almost human, but stretched and altered in ways that made the breath catch in both men's throats. The creature ducked behind the tree, then poked its head out from the side as if observing them. Marion raised his rifle and fired 3 shots. Bark exploded from the tree trunk with each impact, and Fred swore he saw the creature stagger. Then it ran, moving fast across the rocky terrain on 2 legs in a gait that was unnervingly human. Fred raised his own weapon and fired 3 more times as the creature disappeared over the canyon rim, tumbling what the men estimated to be 400 feet into the gorge below. The miners returned to the cabin shaken and immediately told the others what had happened. The consensus was unanimous. They would leave first thing in the morning and abandon the claim if necessary. Whatever those creatures were, and the men were now certain there was more than one, the prudent choice was to get as far away as possible. But as darkness settled over Mount St. Helens, they realized they had waited too long. The first impact came around midnight. Something massive struck the outer wall of the cabin with enough force to shake the entire structure. The men grabbed their rifles and peered through gaps in the log walls, their lanterns casting flickering light across terrified faces. Then came another blow, and another. Rocks began pelting the roof, some as large as a man's head, crashing against the wooden shingles with thunderous force. The men could see shapes moving in the darkness, upright figures circling the cabin and hurling stones with alarming accuracy. At one point, Fred Beck saw a massive hairy arm reach through a chink in the wall and grab for an axe that had been left on the table. He fired at the arm and it withdrew. The siege continued through the night. The creatures climbed onto the roof, their weight causing the beams to groan ominously. They pounded on the walls and shrieked in voices that sounded like nothing the men had ever heard, somewhere between a growl and a scream that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. The miners fired through every gap and crack they could find, using up their ammunition in desperate volleys. According to Fred Beck's account, written years later, they could hear the creatures communicating with one another through a series of whistles, coordinating their assault like soldiers on a battlefield. When dawn finally broke, the attack stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The creatures retreated into the forest, leaving behind a scene of destruction. Rocks were scattered everywhere, some of them weighing several pounds. The cabin bore the marks of the assault, its walls dented and scarred. The men didn't wait to assess the damage. They gathered what they could carry and fled down the mountain, abandoning the gold claim they had worked for 6 years. None of them ever returned. When word of the incident reached the town of Kelso, Washington, it sparked what newspapers of the era called the Great Ape Hunt of 1924. Armed posses ventured into the mountains searching for the creatures, though none were found. Some newspapers mocked the miners as spiritualists and dreamers who had let their imaginations run wild. Others took the account more seriously, noting that the men had nothing to gain from such a tale and everything to lose. The gorge where the attack took place was renamed Ape Canyon, a name it carries to this day. Nearly a century later, researcher Mark Mersell dedicated years to investigating the incident. Using historical records, newspaper archives, and old mining documents, he eventually located the site of the original cabin. Among the debris, buried in decades of forest growth, he found the foundation stones, old nails, and remarkably spent rifle cartridges of the same caliber that Fred Beck had described using during the attack. The physical evidence suggested that something had indeed happened in that remote canyon, something significant enough to make 5 experienced woodsmen abandon years of work and never look back. Fred Beck never recanted his story. In 1967, he published a small book detailing the encounter and his beliefs about what the creatures might have been. He maintained until his death that what attacked them that night was something beyond ordinary understanding, entities that were as real as any bear or mountain lion, but operating according to rules that science could not yet explain. He described the feeling of that night with haunting clarity, the sense that they were being hunted by something intelligent, something that worked together and communicated and understood tactics. These were not mindless beasts. They had surrounded the cabin, tested its defenses, and coordinated their assault with a precision that spoke to higher cognition. What makes the Ape Canyon incident particularly compelling is the detail and consistency of the accounts. The miners described the creature's size and appearance uniformly, estimating them at around 7 feet tall, with dark hair covering their bodies. They noted the human-like quality of the creature's movements, the way they walked upright and used their arms to hurl projectiles. They recalled the eerie whistling sounds that seemed to serve as communication between the attackers. And they all agreed on the most terrifying aspect of the experience: the intelligence in the creature's eyes, the sense that they were being observed and evaluated by minds that understood far more than they should. Decades later, when the Mount St. Helens eruption buried the area under tons of volcanic ash in 1980, the original cabin site was lost beneath the debris. But the name endured. Ape Canyon is still marked on modern maps, a testament to an event that shaped the region's folklore and continues to attract researchers and curious visitors more than a century later. Local indigenous oral traditions speak of creatures matching the miners' descriptions, beings that the Klallam people called Siatik, wild hairy giants said to inhabit the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest. The encounter at Ape Canyon may have been shocking to the miners in 1924, but for the native peoples of the region, such beings were simply a fact of life, dangerous and best avoided, but very much real. The Ape Canyon incident remains one of the most detailed and dramatic cryptid encounters in American history, a story that refuses to fade even as the decades pass and the witnesses themselves slip into memory. 42 years after the miners fled Mount St. Helens, a different kind of terror descended upon a small town in West Virginia. Point Pleasant sits along the banks of the Ohio River, a quiet community where neighbors knew one another by name, and the biggest excitement usually came from high school football games. In 1966, that changed forever when something emerged from the abandoned industrial sites outside of town and began a 13-month haunting that would culminate in one of the worst bridge disasters in American history. The first whispers of something strange came on November 12th, 1966, when a group of gravediggers working in a cemetery near Clendenin saw something they could barely describe. A massive figure had soared over their heads, moving from tree to tree with a speed and agility that seemed impossible for something so large. The men described it as brown and human-like in shape, with an enormous wingspan. They finished their work as quickly as possible and left without looking back. 3 days later, on November 15th, the story exploded into public consciousness. Two young married couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Millette, were driving near an abandoned World War II munitions plant that locals called the TNT area. The site was a sprawling complex of concrete igloos and crumbling buildings where explosives had once been manufactured and stored. It had sat abandoned for years, slowly being reclaimed by the surrounding forest, and it carried a reputation for being a spooky place even before that November night. As the couples drove past the old plant around 11:30 in the evening, they noticed what appeared to be two red lights near one of the buildings. Roger slowed the car, trying to figure out what they were seeing. Then the lights moved, and they realized with mounting horror that they were looking at eyes. The creature attached to those eyes was enormous, at least 6.5 to 7 feet tall, with a body shaped like a man, but bulkier, more muscular. Its skin appeared gray, and folded against its back were wings that seemed impossibly large. But it was the eyes that held them frozen, huge and hypnotic, glowing an eerie crimson in the headlights of the car. Linda Scarberry would later describe the sensation as being unable to look away, as if the creature's gaze had pinned her in place. When the entity finally moved, spreading those massive wings and launching itself into the air, Roger floored the accelerator. The car sped away at over 100 miles per hour, but the creature followed, flying alongside them without ever seeming to flap its wings. It stayed with them until they reached the city limits, then rose into the night sky and disappeared. The 4 witnesses drove directly to the Mason County Sheriff's Office and reported what they had seen. Deputy Millard Halstead found them genuinely terrified and could see no indication that they were lying or playing a prank. He drove back to the TNT area with them, but found nothing. The following day, a local newspaper ran the story under the headline, "Couples See Man-Sized Bird Creature Something," and the Mothman, as it would come to be known, entered the public imagination. Over the following weeks and months, sightings multiplied. A contractor named Newell Partridge reported that his television had suddenly begun displaying a strange pattern before his dog bolted toward the barn, howling, and was never seen again. When Partridge investigated with a flashlight, he saw two glowing red eyes in the darkness. Volunteer firefighters spotted the creature perched on the roof of a building. A woman named Connie Carpenter claimed she saw it in broad daylight, standing beside the road, its red eyes locked onto hers through her car windshield. More than 100 witnesses came forward over the 13 months of activity, describing the same creature with remarkable consistency. The sightings were concentrated around the TNT area, a place that already carried whispers of environmental contamination and mysterious lights. Some researchers later speculated that the abandoned munitions plant, possibly still harboring toxic materials from its wartime operations, might have created some kind of ecological anomaly. Others noted that indigenous peoples in the region had long told stories of winged beings that appeared before times of great tragedy, messengers from another realm who came to warn humanity of impending disaster. If the Mothman was indeed a warning, then the disaster it foretold arrived on December 15th, 1967. At 5 o'clock in the evening, the Silver Bridge, a suspension bridge that connected Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed during rush hour traffic. The bridge had been built in 1928, designed for lighter vehicles from an earlier era, and its I-bar chain suspension system had developed a hidden defect over decades of use. When one of those I-bars snapped, the entire structure fell into the icy waters of the Ohio River in less than a minute. 46 people died in the collapse, making it one of the worst bridge disasters in American history. After the Silver Bridge fell, the Mothman sighting stopped. The creature that had terrorized Point Pleasant for over a year simply vanished, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. Some claimed they had seen it standing on the bridge in the days before the collapse, its red eyes fixed on the doomed structure. Others believed it had been trying to warn them, though what good that warning might have done remains unclear. The connection between the Mothman and the bridge disaster has never been proven, but it has never been disproven either, and it remains one of the most compelling aspects of the legend. What made the Point Pleasant sighting so disturbing was not just the creature itself, but the atmosphere of dread that seemed to accompany its presence. Witnesses consistently reported feelings of intense fear that seemed disproportionate to what they were seeing, as if the creature projected some kind of emotional aura that overwhelmed normal, rational thought. Many described being frozen in place, unable to move or look away, their hearts pounding and their breath coming in shallow gasps. Some reported nightmares that persisted for months or even years after their encounters, dreams in which those glowing red eyes stared at them from the darkness. The TNT area, where so many sightings occurred, added another layer of mystery to the phenomenon. The abandoned munitions plant was rumored to still contain hazardous materials from its wartime operations, and some theorized that whatever lived there might have been affected by or attracted to the unusual environment. The concrete igloos where explosives had been stored remained sealed and overgrown, their contents unknown. Strange lights were reported drifting among the abandoned structures, orbs of blue and orange that moved with apparent purpose through the ruins. Whether these lights were connected to the Mothman or represented a separate phenomenon entirely was never determined. Journalist John Keel spent months investigating the Point Pleasant events, collecting witness testimonies, and documenting strange occurrences throughout the region. His 1975 book, the Mothman prophecies, became the definitive account of what happened and inspired a Hollywood film decades later. Keel connected the Mothman sightings to a broader pattern of paranormal activity in the area, including UFO reports, encounters with mysterious men in black suits who seemed to be monitoring the situation, and prophetic visions experienced by some witnesses. He believed that Point Pleasant had become a focal point for forces beyond human understanding, and that the Mothman was merely one manifestation of whatever was happening there. Today, Point Pleasant embraces its strange history. A 12-foot-tall metal statue of the Mothman stands in the town center, its wings spread wide and its eyes reflecting the sunlight. The Mothman Museum houses original newspaper clippings, witness testimonies, and artifacts related to the sightings. Each September, the town hosts a festival that draws thousands of visitors from around the world, all of them curious about the creature that appeared from nowhere, terrified a community, and vanished just as mysteriously as it arrived. The forests of the Great Lakes region hold their own dark secrets, tales of something that walks upright through the trees on cold Michigan nights, something that looks almost human until you see its face. The legend of the Michigan Dogman dates back to 1887, when two lumberjacks working in Wexford County reported an encounter with a creature they struggled to describe. It had the body of a man, they said, but the head of a dog. It stood on two legs and watched them from the edge of the clearing with eyes that reflected their lantern light. Then it turned and walked away into the darkness, leaving them shaken and uncertain of what they had witnessed. For decades, the story was passed down through oral tradition, known only to small communities in the rural northwest of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. It was said that the Dogman appeared in years ending in 7, following some inexplicable cycle that no one could explain. Sightings were reported in 1917, when a sheriff found a driverless wagon near Traverse City with all 4 horses dead, their eyes wide open as if frozen in terror. Tracks in the dust led away into the forest, tracks that looked like a wolf had been walking on its hind legs. In 1937, a schooner captain on Bowers Harbor reported that his crew had seen a pack of wild dogs moving through the trees along the shoreline, dogs that occasionally rose onto their back legs to peer at the passing vessel. The legend might have remained obscure folklore if not for a radio DJ named Steve Cook. In 1987, Cook worked at a station in Traverse City and decided to create a song about the Dogman as an April Fool's Day prank. He set the tale to music, describing the various sightings over the decades in folksy, storytelling lyrics, and played it on the air, expecting nothing more than a few laughs. What happened next shocked him. Phone lines lit up with calls from listeners who didn't find the song funny at all. They found it terrifying because they had seen the creature too. In the weeks that followed, Cook received over 100 reports from people across Michigan describing encounters with a bipedal, canine-headed creature that matched the descriptions from his song. The phenomenon expanded beyond Michigan. In the early 1990s, a series of sightings near Elkhorn, Wisconsin, brought a new name into the cryptid lexicon: the Beast of Bray Road. Local journalist Linda Godfrey was assigned to cover the story and approached it expecting to debunk what seemed like a silly rural legend. Instead, she found herself confronting eyewitness after eyewitness, ordinary people with no apparent reason to lie, all describing variations of the same creature. It was large, covered in dark fur, with a body that could move on either 4 legs or 2. Its head was unmistakably canine, with a long snout and pointed ears, but its eyes held an intelligence that witnesses found deeply unsettling. Some reported that it watched them with what seemed like curiosity. Others felt naked aggression radiating from its gaze. One of the earliest Beast of Bray road sightings came from a woman named Lori Andrizzi, who was driving home late one night in 1989 when her headlights illuminated a figure crouched by the side of the road. At first, she thought it was a person, kneeling perhaps to examine roadkill. But as she drew closer, she realized it was something else entirely. The creature was covered in grayish-brown fur and had a snout like a wolf. It turned its head to look at her, and in that moment, their eyes met. Andrizzi described the sensation as primal terror, an instinctive recognition that she was in the presence of a predator. She accelerated past and didn't stop until she reached home. More recent encounters have only deepened the mystery. In 2017, a truck driver named Joe Barger was hauling a load of paper through the Manistee National Forest in northern Michigan when he experienced what he would later describe as the most terrifying moment of his life. It was evening, and Barger had pulled over to check an air leak in his brakes. He had his window rolled down and was leaning out to listen to the hissing sound when something approached the cab of his truck. He turned to find a creature standing beside his vehicle, a thing at least 10 feet tall with yellow eyes and a canine head full of massive white fangs. It reached toward him with hands that were almost human, 14 inches across, with curved claws. Barger grabbed his handgun and fired, striking the creature in the face. It fell backward, then rose and ran into the forest. Barger reported that he suffered nightmares for months afterward, dreams in which the creature returned to finish what it had started. He shared his story publicly because he believed other people in the area needed to know what might be lurking in those woods. He had no explanation for what he saw, only the conviction that it was real and that it had fully intended to kill him. The Dogman phenomenon raises uncomfortable questions about the boundaries between myth and reality. Critics point out that there is no biological evidence for such a creature, no bones or specimens, no clear photographs or verified DNA. Supporters counter that the consistency of witness descriptions across more than a century suggests something more than mass hallucination or misidentification. What strikes researchers who have studied the phenomenon is the profound emotional impact these encounters have on witnesses. Unlike typical wildlife sightings, encounters with the Dogman seem to leave lasting psychological scars. Witnesses report insomnia, anxiety, and a persistent feeling of being watched, even in the safety of their own homes. Many describe their lives as divided into before and after, as if the encounter marked a fundamental shift in their understanding of reality. Some become obsessed with the creature, spending years researching and seeking others who have had similar experiences. Others retreat into silence, too afraid of ridicule to share what they saw. The geographic distribution of sightings also raises intriguing questions. While Michigan and Wisconsin remain the primary hotspots, reports have come from across the Great Lakes region and beyond, from Ohio to Minnesota to the Upper Peninsula. Some researchers have noted that many sightings occur near significant water sources, rivers and lakes, and creeks that cut through the dense forests where the creature is said to dwell. Others have observed correlations with Native American sacred sites, suggesting that whatever the Dogman is, it may have connections to the land that predate European settlement by millennia. Whether the Dogman is a flesh and blood animal, some kind of interdimensional interloper, or a manifestation of the human subconscious given temporary form, the encounters continue to be reported, and the witnesses continue to insist they know what they saw. far from the forests of the Midwest, in the high desert of northeastern Utah, there is a place where the rules of reality seem to bend and sometimes break entirely. Skinwalker Ranch encompasses 512 acres of scrubland and pasture in the Uinta Basin, a region that has been associated with strange phenomena for as long as humans have inhabited the area. Indigenous peoples knew this land as a place to be avoided, a location where the boundaries between worlds grew thin and things could cross over that had no business in our realm. European settlers heard the stories and dismissed them as superstition, but as they established their own farms and ranches in the basin, they began to have experiences of their own. Reports of strange lights in the sky over the Uinta Basin date back to at least 1776, when Franciscan missionary Silvestre Vélez de Escalante noted mysterious fireballs appearing over his campfire. Throughout the 20th century, locals reported UFOs, cattle mutilations, and encounters with creatures that defied classification. But the ranch gained its current notoriety when Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased the property in 1994, hoping to establish a quiet cattle operation far from the chaos of modern life. What the Shermans found instead was anything but peaceful. From their first days on the property, strange things began to happen. Their cattle were found dead in the pastures, killed and mutilated with a precision that no predator could achieve. Organs were removed surgically, with no blood spilled on the surrounding ground. The Shermans discovered crop circles appearing overnight in their fields, perfect geometric patterns pressed into the grass by unknown means. They saw lights moving through the sky, objects that accelerated and changed direction in ways that conventional aircraft could not match. The most disturbing encounter came shortly after they moved in. One evening, a massive wolf appeared on the property, larger than any wolf they had ever seen. It seemed docile, almost friendly, approaching the family and allowing them to pet it. But when Terry noticed the animal eyeing one of his calves, he tried to shoo it away. The wolf didn't move. It calmly walked to the calf and sank its teeth into the animal's snout. Terry grabbed his pistol and fired at point-blank range. The bullet struck the wolf, but the creature didn't react. He fired again and again, putting multiple rounds into the animal at close range, and still it showed no sign of injury. Finally, it released the calf, turned, and walked slowly away into the brush. Terry followed, his rifle now in hand, and fired more rounds into the creature. He could see the impact points, could see tufts of fur flying off with each shot, but the wolf kept walking. Eventually, he lost it in the undergrowth. When he examined the ground where the creature had been standing, he found a track that was far too large for any normal wolf, and a single tuft of black hair that smelled like sulfur. The Shermans endured 2 years of increasing terror before selling the property in 1996 to Robert Bigelow, a Las Vegas billionaire with a deep interest in UFO research. Bigelow established the National Institute for Discovery Science on the ranch, installing surveillance equipment and stationing researchers there full-time. What they documented was simultaneously fascinating and frustrating. Strange phenomena continued to occur: lights in the sky, unexplained sounds, equipment malfunctions that defied explanation. But every time the team attempted to gather definitive evidence, something seemed to interfere. Cameras would fail at critical moments. Data would be corrupted. Objects would appear on monitors, but leave no physical trace. One researcher described watching an orange orb emerge from the ground and drift across a pasture. He followed it with his camera, recording what he was certain would be groundbreaking footage. When he reviewed the tape later, the orb was gone. In its place was static, as if something had reached into the recording and erased exactly what he had captured. Another researcher claimed to see a large, dark creature emerge from what appeared to be a portal hanging in the air, a tear in the fabric of reality itself. The creature looked at him, then turned and walked back through the portal, which closed behind it and vanished. The ranch passed through several owners before being purchased in 2016 by Brandon Fugel, a Utah real estate developer who has continued the investigations with modern equipment and methods. His team has documented anomalous radiation readings, signals broadcasting at frequencies that shouldn't exist in nature, and underground structures that ground-penetrating radar suggests might be buried beneath the mesa. What those structures are, who put them there, and what they contain remain among the many mysteries that Skinwalker Ranch has yet to yield. The phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch seem to resist conventional investigation. When researchers focus on one aspect of the strangeness, such as the UFO sightings, activity in other areas intensifies, as if whatever intelligence inhabits the property is deliberately evading study. Equipment failures are so common that team members have learned to carry multiple backups of everything. Batteries drain inexplicably. Hard drives corrupt. Cameras malfunction at precisely the moments when something interesting is happening. It's as if the ranch itself is alive and aware, actively working to maintain its secrets. Some of the most unsettling reports from Skinwalker Ranch involve not creatures or lights, but voices. Multiple witnesses have described hearing speech in languages they don't recognize, coming from empty rooms or from the darkness outside their windows. Others have reported the sensation of being watched, a prickling awareness that something is observing them from just out of sight. Dogs brought to the property have behaved erratically, barking at nothing visible, cowering in corners, or refusing to enter certain areas altogether. Cattle continue to be found mutilated, their wounds so precise that ranchers and veterinarians alike struggle to explain how they were inflicted. The Uinta Basin, where the ranch is located, has a long history of strangeness that predates the Shermans' arrival by centuries. Indigenous peoples avoided the area, believing it to be cursed or inhabited by malevolent spirits. Early settlers reported seeing lights in the sky and hearing strange sounds in the night. A local science teacher named Joseph Hicks spent decades collecting reports of unusual phenomena from basin residents, documenting hundreds of UFO sightings and encounters with unexplained creatures. Whatever is happening at Skinwalker Ranch may be just the most concentrated expression of something that pervades the entire region, a persistent anomaly that has defied explanation for as long as humans have lived there. In the summer of 1995, a panic swept across the island of Puerto Rico. Farmers in the rural highlands began finding their livestock dead in the fields, killed in ways that no predator they knew could accomplish. Goats, sheep, and chickens were discovered with puncture wounds in their necks or chests, their bodies seemingly drained of blood without a drop spilled on the surrounding ground. Whatever was responsible left no tracks, made no sound, and struck without warning. Locals gave the creature a name that would soon spread across the hemisphere: El Chupacabra, the goat sucker. The first major wave of deaths occurred in the town of Orocovis in March 1995, when 8 sheep were found dead with 3 strange puncture marks in their chests. By August, the killings had spread to Canovanas, where approximately 150 animals had been slaughtered. The mayor of Canovanas, Jose Soto, took the threat seriously enough to lead armed patrols through the countryside, hoping to catch whatever was responsible. He never did. The panic intensified in August 1995, when a woman named Madeline Tolentino reported that she had seen the creature outside her mother's house in Canovanas. She described a being roughly 4 feet tall, standing upright on 2 legs, like a human, but clearly not human at all. Its skin was grayish-green and leathery, its head elongated and alien in shape. Down its spine ran a row of sharp quills or spines, and its eyes glowed red in the darkness. It moved with a hopping gait, almost like a kangaroo, and when it noticed her watching, it turned those terrible eyes toward her before bounding away into the night. Tolentino's description became the template for how the world would imagine the Chupacabra. Local artist Jorge Martin created a sketch based on her account, and that image was reproduced in newspapers across Puerto Rico and eventually around the world. By the end of 1995, more than 1,000 animals had been killed on the island, and reports of Chupacabra attacks were spreading to other Caribbean nations, to Mexico, and eventually to the continental United States. The creature's appearance changed as the legend migrated. In Texas and the American Southwest, witnesses began describing something quite different from Tolentino's spiny alien. These chupacabras were canine in shape, walking on 4 legs, with hairless blue-gray skin and prominent fangs. In 2004, a Texas farmer named Devin McAnally shot and killed one of these creatures after catching it attacking his chickens. He preserved the body and had it examined, only to learn that it was a coyote afflicted with severe mange, a parasitic skin condition that causes hair loss and gives the animal a grotesque, otherworldly appearance. Similar explanations have been offered for other chupacabra carcasses found in Texas, Mexico, and elsewhere. The hairless, wild-eyed canines that people were killing and photographing were almost certainly mange-ridden coyotes or dog hybrids, desperate and starving, attacking livestock because their condition had rendered them unable to hunt normal prey. But this explanation does not account for the original Puerto Rican sightings, the bipedal spined creature that Madeline Tolentino and others described in such vivid detail. Researcher Benjamin Radford spent 5 years investigating the Chupacabra phenomenon and eventually traced the original description to an unexpected source. In July 1995, just weeks before Tolentino's sighting, the science fiction horror film Species was released in theaters across Puerto Rico. The film featured an alien-human hybrid creature with a spined back, large eyes, and a generally reptilian appearance, a creature that bore striking resemblance to what Tolentino described. When Radford interviewed her years later, Tolentino confirmed that she had seen the film before her encounter. She had, in essence, seen a monster on screen and then seen it again in her mother's yard, her mind perhaps filling in details from a terrifying movie to make sense of something glimpsed in the dark. This does not mean that nothing was killing livestock in Puerto Rico in 1995, or that witnesses were lying. Something was clearly happening. Some predator was attacking animals and leaving unusual wounds. But the most iconic image of the Chupacabra, the spined, reptilian, red-eyed monster, may owe more to Hollywood than to biology. The legend continues regardless, carried forward by new sightings and new deaths in remote corners of the Americas, a testament to how easily fear can take root and spread when people glimpse something they cannot explain. The Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey stretch across more than 1 million acres of dense, sandy forest, a wilderness so impenetrable that some roads lead nowhere, and some trails haven't been walked in decades. The water in the streams runs the color of tea, stained by tannins from the surrounding cedars, and the silence beneath the canopy can feel almost oppressive. It is the perfect setting for a legend, and the Pine Barrens have provided one of America's oldest and most enduring, the Jersey Devil. The creature's origin story dates back to 1735 to a family named Leeds who lived in the isolated community of Leeds Point. According to the most common version of the tale, Mother Leeds discovered she was pregnant with her 13th child and cursed the coming birth, declaring that this one would be a devil. When the child was born, it appeared normal at first, but within moments it transformed. Its body elongated, sprouting bat-like wings and a forked tail. Its face twisted into something horse-like, with fangs and horns, and its hands became clawed. The creature killed the midwife, flew up the chimney, and disappeared into the Pine Barrens, where it has allegedly lived ever since. Sightings were reported sporadically throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Commodore Stephen Decatur, the famous naval hero, claimed to have seen the creature while testing cannonballs at the Hanover Iron Works in 1778. He reportedly fired upon it directly, but the beast continued flying as if the projectile had passed right through. Joseph Bonaparte, the former king of Spain and brother of Napoleon, lived in Bordentown, New Jersey, after his exile from Europe, and he claimed to have encountered the Jersey Devil while hunting on his estate around 1820. These were credible men, not prone to flights of fancy, and their accounts lent weight to the idea that something genuinely unusual inhabited those dark forests. Then came the week of January 16th through 23, 1909, and the Jersey Devil transformed from a regional curiosity into a full-blown phenomenon. It began with tracks appearing in the snow across Burlington County, strange hoofprints that led over fences, across rooftops, and through yards in ways that no ordinary animal could navigate. The prints were discovered in dozens of locations, sometimes miles apart, as if whatever made them could cover impossible distances overnight. Bloodhounds brought in to track the creature in Hamilton refused to follow the trail, whimpering and backing away when their handlers urged them forward. Then people started seeing the creature itself. Police officers in Camden and Bristol, Pennsylvania, opened fire on something large and winged that flew over their cities in the early morning hours. A trolley car in Haddon Heights was allegedly attacked, the creature swooping down and striking the vehicle before vanishing into the darkness. In Gloucester City, a family reported hearing something shrieking in their backyard and found their dog cowering inside, refusing to leave the house. Tracks led from the yard toward the river and disappeared. The panic spread rapidly. Schools closed as parents refused to let their children walk to class. Mills in the Pine Barrens shut down when workers refused to travel through the forest to reach their jobs. Armed posses formed in multiple towns, men with rifles patrolling the countryside, hoping to kill or capture the beast. The Philadelphia Zoo offered a $10,000 reward for anyone who could bring in the Jersey Devil alive. No one claimed the prize. By January 23rd, the sightings stopped as abruptly as they had begun. The creature that had terrorized an entire region for a week simply vanished, leaving behind only the prints in the melting snow and the memories of those who claimed to have seen it. Over 1,000 people reported encounters during that week alone, their descriptions remarkably consistent despite the chaos. A creature with a horse-like head, bat wings, cloven hooves, and a forked tail, roughly 6 feet tall and capable of flight. Sightings have continued in the decades since, though never with the intensity of that January week. In 1951, a group of boys in Gibbstown reported seeing the creature in the woods behind their homes. In 1980, the chief ranger of Wharton State Forest investigated a farm where pigs had been slaughtered in a manner he could not explain, their heads partially eaten and their bodies scratched, but no tracks or blood anywhere around them. In 1993, a forest ranger driving along the Mullica River encountered something standing in the road, a creature over 6 feet tall with thick black fur and horns that stared at him for a full minute before turning and walking into the trees. The Jersey Devil has become central to New Jersey's cultural identity, embraced by the state, even as questions about its nature remain unanswered. The creature gave its name to the state's professional hockey team, and gift shops across the Pine Barrens sell souvenirs depicting the beast. What actually lives in those ancient forests, if anything, remains unknown. But for nearly 3 centuries, people have reported seeing something there, something that defies explanation and refuses to be forgotten. The waters of Loch Ness in the Scottish Highlands are among the deepest and darkest in all of Britain. The loch stretches for 22 miles through the Great Glen, its surface reflecting the brooding skies of northern Scotland, while its depths, which reach nearly 800 feet in places, remain hidden and inscrutable. Peat particles suspended in the water reduce visibility to almost nothing, creating a realm of perpetual twilight beneath the surface. It is a place that seems designed to harbor secrets, and for centuries, people have whispered about what might lurk in those black waters. The earliest written account of a creature in Loch Ness dates to the 7th century, when the Irish monk Adamnan recorded the deeds of Saint Columba in his biography. According to Adamnan, Columba was traveling through the land of the Picts around 565 AD when he came upon a burial taking place along the banks of the River Ness, which flows from the loch. The locals explained that the deceased had been swimming in the river when a water beast attacked him, mauling him so severely that he died despite their attempts to rescue him by boat. Columba, unperturbed, ordered one of his followers to swim across the river as a test. When the creature surfaced and moved toward the swimmer, Columba made the sign of the cross and commanded the beast to halt. The creature obeyed, retreating into the depths, and the river was thereafter considered safe. For centuries, stories of the water beast persisted among the communities around the loch, woven into the fabric of local folklore, alongside tales of kelpies and water horses from Celtic mythology. But these were tales told quietly, shared among neighbors, and passed down within families. The modern legend of the Loch Ness Monster began in 1933 when a new road was built along the northern shore of the loch, providing clear views of the water for the first time. On April 15, 1933, Aldi Mackay, the manager of the Drumna Drochit Hotel, was driving along this new road with her husband when she spotted something strange in the water. She described it as a whale-like creature, rolling and plunging on the surface before submerging. The Inverness Courier published their account on May 2nd, using the word monster for the first time, and the story quickly spread beyond the Scottish Highlands. 3 months later, a London businessman named George Spicer provided an even more dramatic account. He and his wife were driving along the loch when something large and gray crossed the road in front of their car, moving toward the water. Spicer described it as the nearest thing to a dragon or prehistoric animal he had ever seen, with a long neck and a body about 5 feet tall. The creature disappeared into the undergrowth before they could get a closer look, but the encounter left both of them shaken. By the fall of 1933, the Loch Ness Monster had become an international sensation. Newspapers dispatched reporters to Scotland, eager for any scrap of news about the beast. The Daily Mail sent a big game hunter named Marmaduke Wetherell to track the creature, and he confidently announced that he had discovered fresh footprints on the shore. When casts of the prints were sent to the Natural History Museum in London for analysis, however, they were identified as having been made by a hippopotamus foot, likely from an umbrella stand or similar novelty item. The embarrassment was enormous, but it did little to dampen public enthusiasm. The most famous image of the Loch Ness Monster appeared in April 1934. Known as the surgeon's photograph because it was supposedly taken by a London physician named Robert Kenneth Wilson, it showed a long neck and small head emerging from the water, with ripples spreading outward as if the creature was in motion. The image was reproduced in newspapers around the world and became the definitive representation of Nessie for generations. Only in 1994 was it conclusively revealed as a hoax, the neck nothing more than a sculpted head attached to a toy submarine, part of a revenge plot orchestrated by the humiliated Wetherell with the help of Wilson and others. Despite the debunking of the most famous photograph, sightings have continued to the present day. The official Loch Ness Monster Sightings Register has documented over 1,100 reports since it was established, with new accounts added every year. Some witnesses describe a creature with a long neck and humped back, fitting the classical image. Others report something more serpentine, or simply a large, undefined shape moving beneath the surface. Sonar surveys have occasionally detected large objects in the loch that seem to be alive and moving, though no definitive identification has ever been made. In 2019, a team of researchers conducted a comprehensive DNA survey of the loch, sampling water from throughout its depths and analyzing it for genetic traces of all species present. They found no evidence of large reptiles, no signs of plesiosaurs or other prehistoric survivors. What they did find, however, were significant quantities of eel DNA, enough to suggest that some of the eels living in Loch Ness might grow considerably larger than the typical specimens found elsewhere. Whether an oversized eel could account for centuries of monster sightings remains a matter of debate, but it offered at least a plausible biological explanation for what people might be seeing. The Loch Ness Monster continues to draw visitors from around the world, bringing an estimated $80 million annually to the Scottish economy. Whether Nessie is a surviving prehistoric creature, an unusually large eel, a series of misidentifications and hoaxes, or something else entirely, the legend shows no signs of fading. The dark waters of the loch keep their secrets well, and as long as those depths remain unexplored, the possibility of something extraordinary hiding within them cannot be entirely dismissed. What makes Loch Ness so compelling as a potential home for an unknown creature is its sheer scale and inaccessibility. The loch contains more fresh water than all of England and Wales combined, a vast volume of water that has never been fully explored. The steep sides plunge directly into the depths without the gentle slopes found in other lakes, creating underwater cliffs and caves that could theoretically shelter large animals from detection. The layer of peat particles that colors the water and limits visibility to just a few feet means that something massive could swim within arm's reach of a boat and never be seen. Locals who have lived along the loch for generations tend to take a pragmatic view of Nessie. They may not claim to have seen the creature themselves, but they know people who have, and they've heard enough stories over the years to keep an open mind. Many point out that the loch has been here for 10,000 years, ever since the glaciers retreated at the end of the last ice age. That's a long time for something unusual to take up residence, to adapt to the cold, dark waters and learn to avoid detection. The fact that no definitive proof has been found doesn't mean nothing is there. It might simply mean that whatever inhabits those depths is very good at staying hidden. The search for Nessie continues with increasingly sophisticated technology. Underwater drones equipped with sonar and cameras have explored portions of the loch that humans could never reach. Hydrophones have been deployed to listen for unusual sounds in the depths. Each investigation adds to our knowledge of the loch's ecosystem while failing to provide the definitive evidence that would either prove or disprove the monster's existence. Perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries, inviting wonder rather than closure. On the morning of September 5th, 1891, two ice delivery men named Marshall McIntyre and Bill Gray were preparing their wagon for their daily rounds in the small town of Crawfordsville, Indiana. It was around 2 in the morning, the streets empty and silent, when both men were suddenly overcome by a sensation they would later describe as awe and dread. Looking up at the sky, they saw something that stopped them in their tracks. A massive shape was moving through the air, roughly 300 to 400 feet above the ground. It was pure white and seemed to have no definite form, resembling nothing so much as a great white shroud or sail. The thing was perhaps 18 feet long and 8 feet wide, and it appeared to propel itself through the sky using several pairs of fin-like appendages that extended from its sides. As it drew closer, the men could see a single great eye, glowing reddish-orange in the darkness, and they could hear a sound emanating from somewhere within the mass, a wheezing, plaintive cry like nothing they had ever heard before. The creature circled a nearby barn several times, its body flapping like a flag in the wind, occasionally convulsing in what appeared to be agony. Then it swept down toward the men, close enough that they could feel a displacement of air, before rising again and disappearing to the east. McIntyre and Gray fled to their homes and didn't emerge until daylight. The Crawfordsville Daily Journal published their account that very day, and within hours, the town was gripped by excitement and fear. Word spread that something unearthly was flying through the Indiana sky, and when darkness fell on September 6th, hundreds of residents ventured outside to watch. They were not disappointed. The creature appeared again, circling over the town as it had the night before, its single eye blazing and its plaintive cry echoing through the streets. Witnesses described feeling the monster's hot breath as it passed overhead. Some fell to their knees in prayer, convinced they were witnessing a sign of the apocalypse. The story spread beyond Crawfordsville, picked up by the Indianapolis Journal and eventually by newspapers across the country. Letters flooded into the town postmaster from people desperate to know more about the apparition. Some wrote asking if the end times had arrived. Others wanted to know if the creature had been seen elsewhere. A woman from St. Louis wrote with particular urgency, asking what color the monster was and whether it could be seen during daylight hours. Two local men, John Hornbeck and Abe Hernley, decided to solve the mystery themselves. On the night of September 7th, they tracked the creature through the streets of Crawfordsville, following its erratic movements until they were able to observe it closely. What they discovered was somewhat anticlimactic. The Crawfordsville monster was not a supernatural entity or an unknown species. It was a massive flock of killdeer birds, hundreds of them flying in tight formation, their white breast feathers catching the light of the town's newly installed electric lamps and creating the illusion of a single pale mass. The birds' distinctive cry, amplified by their numbers, accounted for the strange sounds witnesses had reported. The flock had apparently become confused by the electric lights, which had only been operational for a few weeks, and was circling the town in disorientation. The The Crawfordsville Daily Journal published this explanation on September 8th, and with it, the monster was officially debunked. But the story had already escaped into the wider world, and the explanation never received the same coverage as the original sighting. The tale was later included in Charles Fort's 1931 book, Lo, a collection of anomalous phenomena that Fort believed science had wrongly dismissed. For decades, the Crawfordsville monster was cited in books about cryptids and UFOs as an example of unexplained aerial phenomena. Its mundane origin as a confused flock of birds, largely forgotten. The story endures as a reminder of how easily the human mind can be fooled, especially in darkness and unfamiliarity. The people of Crawfordsville in 1891 had never seen a large flock of birds illuminated by electric light, and their minds filled in the gaps with something more dramatic. The single eye was perhaps the reflection of the light itself. The fins were the beating of hundreds of wings. The hot breath was the displacement of air as the flock passed. Yet for those 2 nights, before the explanation arrived, the terror was absolutely real, and the creature the townspeople saw was as genuine to them as anything they had ever witnessed. These accounts, spanning centuries and continents, share something fundamental. They remind us that the world is larger and stranger than we often allow ourselves to believe. Whether these creatures are flesh and blood, figments of overwrought imaginations, or something in between, the experiences of those who encountered them were undeniably real to the witnesses themselves. They saw something, felt something, and carried those memories for the rest of their lives. Perhaps that is the true power of these legends. They preserve moments when ordinary people brushed against the extraordinary, when the comfortable boundaries of everyday life suddenly revealed themselves to be far more permeable than anyone had imagined. The miners who fled Ape Canyon, the couples who raced away from the Mothman's glowing eyes, the farmers who found their livestock mysteriously slaughtered. All of them emerged from their encounters changed in some fundamental way, marked by an experience that defied explanation and refused to be forgotten. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you'll find yourself thinking about these stories, wondering what might lurk in the forests beyond your window or the depths of the nearest lake. There's comfort in knowing that mysteries still exist, that the world hasn't been entirely mapped and cataloged and explained away. Somewhere out there, in the darkness between the trees or the murky waters of an ancient loch, something might be watching, waiting, existing in that liminal space where legend and reality blur together. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the unexplained. If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing it with others who appreciate a good mystery. Sweet dreams, and remember, sometimes the shadows hold more than we know.